Okay, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the webinar RDRS, How to Access WHOIS Data Today. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm Head of International Digital Infrastructure and Resilience at ECHO, Association of the Internet Industry. And this webinar is a collaboration of ECHO with ICANN, the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers. And our host today is Thomas Rickert. He is Director Names and Numbers at ECHO. And our speakers today are in alphabetical order, Odeline MacDonald. She's Associate General Counsel at ICANN. Hopefully we will also have Prudence Malinki with us from Markmonitor. There was some confusion about the starting of the webinar. So maybe we, fingers crossed, she will join us later. We have with us Adam Peake. He's with the Global Stakeholder Engagement Team at ICANN. And Sarah Wyld, she is a Policy and Privacy Manager at Tucows. Before we get things started, I would like to recommend you the next webinars and events where ECHO is present and active. So on Thursday this week, we will have a Top DNS Best Practice webinar presented by PIR, the registry of .org, and the Internet Watch Foundation about the latest collaboration to fight CSAM online. I will share the link with you on the chat right after the introduction. We will also be present at the Nordic Domain Days for a DNS abuse workshop, and also with a DNS abuse session at the next MORG meeting on the 6th of June in Vienna. If you want to learn more about ECHO, about our latest events and offers, please follow the link. And if you would like to get your updates in the mailbox, just follow the link to our newsletter registration. Some housekeeping rules before we get things started. Of course, this is a webinar, and this webinar will be recorded. The recording will be available right after the meeting. And for this webinar, the ICANN expected standards of behavior apply. You're muted throughout the webinar. Of course, this webinar is here for asking questions. So you've got two ways. On the right-hand side, you have the GoToWebinar dashboard, where you can type in questions in the questions pod, but you can also raise your hand by clicking the respective button and raise your questions verbally. We will unmute you. Please, before you ask a question, state your name and your affiliation. And right after the webinar, you will have the opportunity to participate in a short survey, which helps us to improve our services and to provide feedback. And with this, I would like to hand over to our host, Thomas Rickert, for the first introductory remarks. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lars, for the kind introduction. My name is Thomas Rickert. I'm Director Names and Numbers with ECHO. And for those who I have not met before and who've not been with me on some of the committees that we're going to talk about today, I think we should talk a little bit about the history of how we got here, because when the GDPR kicked in 2018, the ICANN board chose to issue a temporary specification, which then led to an ePDP being installed by ICANN, an expedited policy development process. And expedited in ICANN terms can be a couple of years. And it actually took this group a couple of years to come up with policy recommendations to govern how registration data can be requested and under what circumstances registration data should be disclosed to the requestor. And that was then turned into the SaaS, the Standardized System for Access and Disclosure. That was too expensive for ICANN's liking, and it was a very feature-rich system, if you wish. And what we then did is work on a stripped-down version, a pilot project, to see whether that gets traction in this industry and beyond, for requestors that want to see non-public registration data to be put in touch with the appropriate registrar for the disclosure of that registration data. And I've been unfortunate depending on your perspective, to having been part of the EPDP team as well as of the RDRS Standing Committee, which is still work that's underway at ICANN. So, as you will have noted by now, ICANN is a world of acronym, and there will be some more acronyms, but we're going to explain those during this session. And what we're trying to achieve today is give plain language, simple explanations on how registration data for generic domain names can be requested through the system, and on the other hand, how registrars who have that data are working on processing these requests that are being passed on via ICANN's RDRS to the registrars. And this is sort of part one of a two-part series of events that we're planning. So this is the one for those who are not really on the disclosing side of things, that want to learn how they have to manage the RDRS. Also, it's likely nothing for folks who are interested in the entire ICANN infrastructure and how things work policy-wise, but this shall be sort of an introductory guide of how things work. And maybe more importantly, since this is a pilot project, we want to encourage requestors to use the system so that we can work on it to make it better. And ICANN is actually working on making it better through this committee that I just mentioned, namely the RDRS Standing Committee, and Adam and Odeline will also speak to the things that we're currently contemplating to be, injected into the RDRS in order to make it more feature-rich and in order to make it better. So what you see today is just a snapshot of where we are today, but this is not the end. If you think that this is not good enough, that this is not ready for prime time, should it be coming out of the pilot, then it's on all of us to properly advertise the RDRS, to talk about the benefits, to also talk about the things that you would like the RDRS to have so that you actually want to use it. So we are all ears, and we will report back to the RDRS Standing Committee on that. And hopefully this is going to be something that everyone appreciates at the global level, because it's one of the beauties of the system is that you can go to one place, ask for data, and then it's going to be disseminated to whoever is on the other end at the global level. So that's pretty nice actually. So just give it a listen. Be patient in case you don't find all the features today that you otherwise would have hoped to find. Also, we can't turn back the clock entirely, so there shouldn't be any expectation that the RDRS will give you freely available all the data that has been illegally, from a European perspective and other privacy regimes, pre-GDPR or pre-May 2018. But we are trying to help to make it easier for those who have a legitimate right in asking for the data to obtain that data. And the second event that we're going to plan, and there's going to be one more that I'm sure Sarah will talk about, is going to be more about the practitioners, both on the requestor as well as the disclosing side, to talk about real life scenarios, what the issues are in practice today and how those frictions between, if you wish, between those two sides can be mitigated, and how we can come to a consistent decision making that is predictable in terms of outcome. Now, I hope that I could interest you in a little bit more detail, and you're going to get that. So the way we're going to do this today is we're going to hear from Adam, and Odeline is going to add to that how ICANN sees the RDRS, what it looks like, what it's for, and all that, and also the improvements underway. Then if Prudence is going to be with us on time, she's going to talk about the perspective of the requestors. So Prudence Malinki is with Markmonitor. Most of you will know that Markmonitor is a corporate registrar where basically all the rights holders that have an interest in this data disclosure are meeting as their customers. So she's very well versed in their respective needs and can speak to that. And Sarah is sipping on her GDPR mug which comes in very handy, because not only is she an expert in all things EPDP and RDRS, but also she's an expert in privacy laws, and she will be able to help you understand better how this works from a registrar perspective. And now, and we're also going to have time for questions and comments. And I suggest that we pause after each of these small, short presentations to see whether there are questions that you didn't understand something. And that we're going to do after each of the introductory remarks by the speakers. And after that, we're going to have a little more time for an open discussion. I hope that sounds good. I hope that sounds like a robust plan. And with that, let me hand it over to Adam. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you to you. Thank you to Lars and Echo for inviting us to join with you in this webinar. And please don't apologize for all the work you've done for us on this topic and many others, Thomas. It's very, very welcome and very important. So thank you. As you mentioned, my name's Adam Peake. I work for our global stakeholder engagement group in Europe. My colleague Odeline MacDonald is here, and she's the general counsel and looking after a lot of data protection issues, and is definitely the subject matter expert on this topic. So next slide, please. We'll try and bounce through these slides quite quickly. They will be available afterwards. So yeah, can we go to the next slide? So here we are, launched on the 28th of November. So we're about 5 months in. As Thomas said, it's a pilot, it's a proof of concept. At launch, there were 56 registrars opting in and onboarding. And at the time, it covered about 51% of the GTLDs, generic top-level domain names under management. Works out, I think, at about 60% of all domain names, something like that. And since then, we've had 30 more registrars to opt in and join. And this, as Thomas said, is one of the things that we're desperately trying to encourage. We want to see this to work. And that means that we need requesters. We also need registrars opting into the system. The next slide, please. So again, this is a little bit of the background. We mentioned WHOIS, the WHOIS data service. Publicly identifiable information, at the time it was publicly identifiable information about registrants. GDPR came along, and from 2018, that information was not available. It includes information about used to include information about the registrant, so home address, your name, telephone numbers, even fax numbers, and so on and so forth. So under GDPR, that was redacted. And there are various reasons for people wanting to access that information. Of course, intellectual property for criminal investigations, for technical issues and investigations of that nature, consumer protection, and so on. So until then, that information has been redacted, and we have been seeking, as Thomas mentioned, various ways to give access seekers means to gain a legitimate access to those systems. The next slide, please. So, yeah. So again, as I mentioned, after 2000, everything was redacted, and this slide explains some of the lookup processes that used to be available. There is also new lookup tools, as the WHOIS protocol is being replaced by registration data access protocols, which adds more sophistication in terms of services and support. Internationalization of domain names are there, secure access to data, and so on. And you can find more information about RDAP, as it's known, in the link on that slide. Not entirely relevant to this presentation, but it shows an evolution of the system that's going on in parallel. Next slide, please. So this is the complication of how data is being requested now pre-RDRS. You'd have to first of all find out, look up the domain name to identify which registrar manages that domain name. You'd have to contact that registrar, and those methods could be email or phone or even fax machine or some other method. And so you're actually struggling to find out who to ask to process a request for information that you want about that domain name. So it was complicated, and that's the system we're trying to replace. So the next slide, please, which will hopefully show us how much simpler requesting data is under the RDRS system. You log into an RDRS account using your ICANN account, and you submit a request through a standardized form or template. So over the past 4 months or so, we hope it's been a little easier for users, and both the requesters and for the registrars, to access and respond to these requests for data. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is where we are. The Registration Data Request Service, RDRS, as we will keep saying, connects requesters with registrars for the to request GTLD data, registrant data, and one of the key features of this system is that as it is a pilot service, as it is a proof of concept, there are no policy development processes in place to require a registrar to respond to these requests. So it's a voluntary service at the moment, and we will see how that develops. As Thomas mentioned, there's been a long process of trying to improve the system after GDPR came into place. The process he described as the SAD, the Standardized Access Disclosure System, went through a long policy development process, and the board was concerned that it was both complex, it was expensive, and while it has many features that would be extremely useful, they wanted to check if using this RDRS proof of concept system, whether we could implement a simpler system that provided an equal, or not equal, but adequate level of service. And one of the points of RDRS is to learn from this experience so that we can see, can we develop a system off RDRS as it improves, so that it achieves many of the goals that the SAD process that went through the generic name supporting organization, the board, etc. If it can achieve many of the goals that the SAD process recommended. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as I said, it's a pilot system. It's going to inform the ICANN board about how to achieve those goals from the SAD process I mentioned. It will be running for 2 years, and we're now 4 or so months within that two-year pilot process, and the data is being shared publicly. It will be reviewed by the community, the committee that Thomas has mentioned he's a member of, to determine what the next steps should be. Do we return back to the SAD system, or do we have an enhanced version of the RDRS that will meet many of the same goals? If we could go to the next slide, please. This slide just quickly runs through how the process was developed. It's a process developed by ICANN.org. It leverages existing systems used by the registrars, particularly the name service portal, which means that there's a lower cost and lower training and etc. Process for the registrars who are using the system. And as mentioned, it was launched in November of 2023 as a 2-year pilot. And so we're into that process now. We're learning how it works. And how does the system work? We can go to the next slide, please. So it's a simple process of submitting and receiving requests for non-public GTLD registration data. It comes with a standardized form. So once you learn the format, once you have the form and the templates, you're able to repeat your operations should you have more than requests for information that you want to use. And the registrar is the person who determines whether or not to disclose the information or not. So the disclosure point is external to the system. And let's go to the next slide and discuss that a little bit more. The first point is that it does not guarantee access to the registration data. Registrars have different methods and criteria for deciding whether disclosure should be made. The communication and data disclosure between the registrar and the requesters takes place outside the system. So that's a discussion that takes place outside of the RDRS system. And that disclosure then takes place directly between the registrar and the requester. Yeah, I think that's, yeah, we can move on to the next slide, please. Trying to run through quite a lot of slides and trying to run through them quite quickly. As I said, the slides will be available, so you'll be able to review these a little bit quieter and easier after the presentation. So who can use the system? Participating ICANN accredited registrars and requesters, who can be anybody seeking non-public data. This includes individuals, but we're really focusing on specifics such as law enforcement agencies, government agencies, consumer organizations, IP attorneys, cybersecurity professionals. But I think there's a whole range of anybody can use the system they register. So that's about the users and use of the system. Could we go to the next slide, please? These are the requests that cannot be supported by the system. So a registrar has to have volunteered to be part of the system and making the domains they have under management available for the requester to query. The registry is not involved in this process. The requests for non-public registration data are only for GTLDs. CCTLDs are not included in this system, and the domain names that are under the privacy or proxy service providers are not supported by this service. And this is similar to the pre-GDPR system. If you wish to access data from a proxy or privacy service, then you have to contact the proxy or privacy service provider and make that request, and that request is done outside of the RDRS system. If we could go to the next slide, please. So there are benefits, which is of course good. So it's a potential one-stop shop for the requesting. You don't have to look up various registrars. If the domain name you're seeking, if the registrar who holds that domain name is within the RDRS system, then you will be able to get access to that data or make that request for that domain name because it will be within the system. So it has a one-stop shop element to it if the registrar is participating. Instead of having to respond to different processes that a registrar might have, you as a requester are using a single type of template and form, so the information you're requesting across the whole registrar group is the same, much easier to do. And it's much easier to upload the correct documentation, whatever that may be for the particular request you're making, because it's outlined in the template. And so you're not having to think about this every time from scratch and responding to different needs. So the template guides you through the information that will be requested of you, so that the registrar is getting the adequate information they need. Let's go to the next slide, please. So notable features. So as we said, the template system is ideal. You can save them to your account so that you're working with similar requests if you're the type of organization that may be submitting multiple requests over a period of time. So it's simplifying your future submissions on these topics. There is an expedited review feature. It's a request for faster processing time by the registrar. It does not guarantee accelerated resolution of the requesting process between you, the requester, and the registrar. But registrars are obviously going to take notice of this and respond appropriately. It should not be used for emergency situations, but it can expedite something that you feel is warranted for some faster response from the registrar. If we can move to the next slide, please. Registrar participation, as we've noted, as I mentioned, it's voluntary from all the ICANN, but all of ICANN's accredited registrars are being very strongly encouraged to participate. We're hoping that it will make their lives easier, as well as making the RDRS function work. what it will do is benefit the whole system, including the registrars themselves. The board will be able to make a better decision about what to do about the expedited policy development process that Thomas mentioned that was put in place some years ago, so that those recommendations can lead us to a better system that will make it easier, particularly for the registrar group. And we are working very closely with the registrars, again, as Thomas mentioned in his introduction. So we're very grateful that they are participating and paying attention, really. It makes the system work. Next slide, please. If you are a registrar, there are, of course, benefits. You have a centralized and standardized form that you're dealing with. Smaller registrars may not have the processes in place. This gives them processes that they can use as standardized. It makes it easier, less staff time, less difficulty in receiving and handling calls and email and customized web forms, etc. Everything is in one place in a standardized way. It might reduce the number of complaints that happen with the ICANN's compliance team. It's improving our processes. There are frequently asked question documents. There's help in functions. So everything that you need as a registrar, there's things there to help you go through this process, simplifying the process, and simplifying the process is good business. And it's a tool, as I already mentioned, that's being used by many or by all registrars, the naming services portal. So it's not something that they have to have training for. It's something that is there within their systems already. So there are a lot of advantages on business processes and standardizing requests and so on. If we go to the next slide, we can get into some of the benefits we've been talking about. So due to transparency of this process, and also so that we can monitor its progress throughout the months, the 24 months for the whole period, we're doing a lot of metrics and reporting. These take place on a monthly basis, reporting on the number of requests received, the responses, who's making those requests, etc. And that information is publicly available. There's a web page listed at the bottom, and we can again, you will see this information in the slide if you want to access later. And there are some particular parts of the metric that are relevant for different groups. Law enforcement, for example, there's a particular part of the metric database that will help you understand what the requests are from that particular group. So the metrics are an important part of both improving the process, but also transparency about how it's working, so that people can judge for themselves what the policy development process is achieving, because it is part of a policy development process. Could we go to the next slide, please? So some data points, and these are from, I think it's the middle of April. So we've got the total number of requesters who've been using the system, the number of lookup requests, and particularly the ones that were requests to non-participating registrars, because we do not have the whole registrar community participating. And if you put in a request that it goes to a registrar that's not in the system, then of course you get a null result. There is one benefit to that, what you've done and what you leave. So you might get no response back from the registrar because they're not in the system. But what you are left with is a very nice PDF document with all the information that you would want to send to a registrar by all of those earlier processes I mentioned. So it's not wasted time. You're going to have done it anyway, and you end up with a form, a complete set of information that is particularly useful if you have to continue with that old semi-manual process of a phone call and a PDF and an email, etc. There are about 230 million GTLDs under management at the moment. So what this means with the number of registrars that are in process at the moment is that there are about 135 million names under management that you could be gaining access to. So I don't want to overemphasize the fact that there aren't it is significant that there are non-participating registrars, but there's also a very significant number of names under management that you can gain access to. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Something that Thomas mentioned as a priority for us as we're moving forward. It's not a fixed system for 24 months. There's a rolling process of enhancements that are being made for requesters and also for the registrars in their response processes. And these are some of the examples that have gone through the GNSO, Generic Name Supporting Organization Standing Committee. Thomas is a member, to help improve this process. So there's more going through the system, and Thomas, I'm sure, can give us an example of those. The next slide is links that will hopefully be useful to you. And if we move a little bit further, this is all the information. It's changing, it's being updated. FAQs are being updated, of course. So I hope this will be useful to you if you want to follow up on how to use the system. And then the final slide is to say thank you and also to give some links to where ICANN resources are available. And thank you very much. I hope I haven't spoken for too long. I probably have, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Adam. Odeline, is there anything that you'd like to add to Adam's intervention?
Oh, just briefly, regarding the improvements that Adam mentioned, indeed, we're working very closely with the GNSO, so committee, standing committee, and there's like a second wave and third wave of improvements that will be coming up. So it's not just ICANN working on the potential improvements. We work on this collaboratively with the community, let's put it like a representative of the community, and we decide together, prioritize, and then we work with our technical team to put these improvements into the RDRS. So more is coming, I believe, after our next ICANN meeting in Kigali in June.
Thank you so much, Odeline. Last, the questions?
Yes, we have collected a few questions over the time. So the first question is from Alyssa Ritterhoff, and she's asking, is there a list of registrars who have opted into the RDRS program?
Yes, so if you go to the monthly reports, at the bottom of the report, there is the list of the registrars that have opted in. The links are in the last slide that was shared by Adam. I can share that in the chat, but I don't know if that works in this webinar, but I can certainly share that in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Stefan Radek. Is there anything planned to request and receive publicly available data via an API? For example, I might need in future to verify the company owning a domain, and this should be an automated process.
So the question on the API is a recurrent question. We're looking at this. API requires a lot of investments, and we have to keep in mind that the RDRS is a pilot system for a 2-year pilot, and we have to see how it evolves and what type of data we're collecting, and we have to also work together with the ICANN board to see what would be the next phase. It's not something that we are ignoring. It's just something we are working on priorities and developments that can be implemented immediately without, costing too much time and effort, and also balancing the needs as well for what the system is. Being reminded this is a pilot system, but it certainly is a recurrent discussion.
I've got also a quite tricky one. So this is from Frederick Tess. As a user, when I want to visit a website or send an email, my request to know to whom I'm giving my data and getting information is legitimate. Do I need to use RDRS? For instance, I've received an email from president@icann.group asking me personal data and leading to www.icann.group. Is that the legitimate side of ICANN and a legitimate email? How do I know it?
I am not sure I have all the different, I get the angle of the question, ICANN.group is not one of us. We're ICANN.org. So this
I think this is just an example.
That's the example, of course. Yes, just want to say, so be alert. We're not group. So defining, I mean, I'm not here to define whether or not you have a legitimate interest. You would have to argue this in the request, and it would be the registrars to assess whether your request is legitimate or not. It's, of course, a legal argumentation that will need to be put into the form. But I think this is rather maybe a question for Sarah afterwards than it is for me.
Okay, Lars, I think we need to move on, and we can maybe take more questions at the very end.
And we can move on, so please.
Thank you so much, Lars, and thanks so much, Odeline, for responding to the questions. Now we do have Prudence with us. I understand that she's not on camera, but she's joined by phone. So welcome, Prudence, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, hi everyone. My name is Prudence Malinki. I'm the head of Global Industry Relations for a corporate registrar known as Markmonitor, who is actually signed up for the actual RDRS program. And today I'm going to be talking specifically about the experience of requesters. And also what I'm hoping to do today is impart some assistance and insight to help requesters, of which I know there are many on the call today, to help navigate the RDRS system to try and really maximize the likelihood of success when you do make your requests through the system, the standardized system there. Okay, so Adam did a fantastic job of explaining the context and the history behind RDRS, and hopefully has set out some information as to what RDRS is and hopefully what RDRS isn't. However, one of the things I really want to drive home is that this is a pilot, and it's being lovingly referred to at the moment as an experiment. And as such, you know, there is scope for improvement. It is not perfect. And if we collaborate together, I think we can try and improve the experience, not just for registrars, but also for you as requesters. I'm so pleased that there are so many requesters on today's call, and I'm hoping this can be the start of continued productive collaboration and discussions. And one thing I really want to highlight is at the next ICANN meeting in Kigali, there will be an in-person session, which obviously can be attended remotely and in any way possible. But this session to do with RDRS is going to be really practical. It's going to have practical examples to help people understand what the pitfalls are, what to avoid, why things haven't been successful, and to give that additional context and framework to ensure that we can start maximizing the likelihood of success when people do submit requests in the system. Okay, so let's get started. So obviously, anyone here who's submitted through RDRS knows it's supposed to be a straightforward, simplistic, three-stage submission process. However, we all know, and we can all say, you know, with all honesty, it's not as straightforward as it seems, and it's a little bit clunky for both sides, and there's scope to really change and make this better. So I'm really hoping that we can all try and figure out ways to make it better for everyone. And an API was one of the really great suggestions. I know that's been thrown around by multiple different parties. So hopefully we can get that, the investment to that going in the future. But with the three-stage process, the success or the likelihood of the request being successful will really be dependent on a number of factors. And one of the primary obvious factors that's also been pointed out by Adam that I just want to drive home is that RDRS is wholly dependent on which registrars are engaging and using the system. If they're not using RDRS, then it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to use RDRS in order to submit your request successfully. So we all have a vested interest to ensure that we gain as much registrar engagement with this system and this pilot or this experiment as possible. Another element is when you are submitting your request, it's really helpful to ensure that you identify yourself correctly. So if you're coming from an IP perspective, identify yourself accordingly. However, if you're a domain investor, there's no judgment here. I'm not judging you. This is perfectly fine. You're allowed to use RDRS too, but don't misidentify yourself for whatever reason. There's no shame in your game. I'm just going to throw that out there. And also as well, making sure that, I know Adam talked about this, I just want to really kind of drum this home too. Even though the RDRS as a system has a expedited option, and that it is there, you can tick it, you can highlight it. There's a couple of things that you really need to factor in as well. Using the expedited system still is in the discretion of the registrar on record. It's not guaranteed that it will be expedited. And if you are going to use the expedited option, please make sure that when you are doing it, it is a genuine request that you've made. One of the reasons for a rejected complaint or a rejected request or an expedited is where it's a standard trademark request. It's been flagged for it to be expedited, but obviously it's not going to be expedited because it's a standard IPM request. Another thing to factor in as well, and this is quite important as well, because it may seem like common sense, but I just want to state it anyway. If you do genuinely have an emergency, and this is something that needs to be resolved at the earliest instance, then what you really do need to do is not just use the RDRS submission system and make a request. You will still need to reach out to the registrar on record, and please make sure that you do so. The RDRS even has a facility inbuilt to make sure that you have the contact details for the said registrar to ensure that you are able to reach out and make that additional direct request. Come from multiple angles to really make sure that you're maximizing your likelihood of having the outcome that you want. Another thing to think about as well is, I know I've kind of touched on this a little bit. Having a famous trademark, it matters to you, it matters to me, it matters to our client, it matters to the trademark holder, the trademark proprietor. It's not necessarily sufficient for the purposes of an expedited request. So some may not treat it as expedited. They may still provide the information in accordance to their balancing exercise, but just bear in mind that that is not a traditional route. These are tended to be something that is an emergency. And also, when you are submitting your RDRS request, it will actually give you options to highlight exactly what types of requests can be categorized as an emergency to help you understand and to help you make that decision as to whether you should tick that button or whether you should maybe save it for another day, because you don't always have to tick the emergency button, even though it's there. You don't have to do it. You don't have to. Okay, so another thing to think about as well is make sure that when you're writing the specific issue in hand, be as clear as you can, but also try and be as concise as you can. You do have quite a few words that you can use there, but be careful with your words and try and be as transparent and clear as possible. If your issue or your reason doesn't necessarily make sense, or if your issue isn't exactly clear, then you're not likely that if you are being clear with the actual issue at hand, then the registrar is not going to understand what you want and may not be able to fulfill your request. So this is your one time to stick the landing, because ultimately what we want is for you to stick the landing, get a 10 and get the data that you need. However, just to bear in mind, and I know Adam's saying this as well, I'm going to say it too, and I know also as well, Sarah's going to say the same. There's no guarantee of the receipt of the data. The balancing exercise will need to be conducted by registrars, and they do have a discretion as to whether they provide that data or not. But what I'm hoping to do is provide some hopeful tips and tricks, or just gentle nudges and reminders to really help ensure that we can increase your likelihood to get the outcome that we want. So The RDRS system is really great in the sense that if you are trying to comply with a legal document, or if you are trying to comply with a court order or a subpoena, it gives you the facility to upload that subpoena. If there are deadlines on said court order, you can provide that data. Provide as much salient and relevant information as you can to ensure that you're able to convey the complexity or the importance of what it is that you're doing. And so as well, if you are trying to identify yourself, I'll say this again, make sure that you identify yourself correctly under the request category. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Okay, so just some additional points here. So as I've mentioned before, registrars will have a level of flexibility and discretion, and they will apply a balancing test. Even though, and this is why it's going to be so important for us as requesters to make sure that we're able to adequately convey why we need the data, and to do it in a way with as much salient information, salient evidence, and correct information supplied as possible, in order to make sure that there can be no reason why, and if there is still a denial, this is a really good example for stuff that we can discuss during the Kigali meeting, and we can come up with some really practical kind of examples there. One of the highest mentioned reasons during the March RDRS data report, one of the highest denial reasons is the request being incomplete. I cannot stress this enough. If you have relevant information, always make sure that you submit it. If there is a clear and concise reason as to why you need that data, always try and ensure that you submit that to really make sure that a registrar can truly understand why you need it, and compel them to give you what you need. And also another thing to bear in mind, even though one of the categories of requester is a UDRP kind of provider or a UDRP related entity, remember, RDRS is not a mandatory element in order for you to draft or file your UDRP complaint. So don't feel that you must use this system in order to do a UDRP. I just wanted to make sure that you know that there. And another thing is, even though this is integrated into the simplistic, allegedly, 3-stage process, always do make sure that if you are actually doing your search and requesting the data, double check and make sure that the data isn't already available or publicly available already. Because again, if that is the case, then this request isn't really going to do anything. It's not going to be beneficial for you at that time. And another thing, and this was another tip that was provided by a fellow registrar to help you out. If you are engaging as a law enforcement agency or an LEA, or law enforcement is the actual category or requester category that you are applying under, you can't state it enough. So you can't overstate it, keep saying it. If you can write, I am from law enforcement or I am an LEA, put it as many times as possible, even though there's a category, even though it cannot be stated enough, because that will really help differentiate and identify and help categorize when law enforcement agents are making requests as well. And it's the same if you're doing it as an IP person. Just make sure that whenever you are making your request, that it is clear and it is concise as well. And one final thing that I will mention as well is, as I've mentioned before, and as I opened up my slide deck, kind of alluding to, RDRS is a pilot. RDRS is an experiment. RDRS is many things, but it is not perfect. And as such, there are very clear and distinct limitations as to what is applicable for RDRS at this time. And that includes CCTLDs not being in scope. Nope, they're not part of the RDRS party. Will they join later? Maybe, we don't know. Possibly not. Maybe we don't know. But at this moment in time, they are a definite no. In fact, the RDRS system has recently been updated. So when you are making your submission or your request, it will clearly state which TLDs are applicable at this time and which ones aren't. So you can very clearly identify whereabouts you are with regards to, or whereabouts you should be with regards to RDRS and whether it is relevant for you in that TLD or the extension that you want the registered data for. So we already know that there are some TLDs that are not included as well, that aren't CC'd, such as .gov or .int or .edu. They're not included in the RDRS experiment at this time. But we are clearly signposting this during the application process. And also as well, here's the thing, the RDRS process has a built-in checker. So double check, make sure before you click submit, before you finally commit, that you've read through everything clearly, that it makes sense, that you've conveyed all of the relevant things, you've uploaded all of the relevant additional evidence, information, and context that you can in order to maximize the success of your application. And that's it for me. I really hope that we can continue these discussions at the next ICANN meeting and at the next RDRS session that's for everybody, which I believe shall be in Kigali. And I'll open the floor for any questions, which I may not be able to answer because clearly I'm not ICANN. But yes, happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Prudence. I suggest that since we're a little bit late in the hour, that we move to Sarah straight away. For all the participants, we're going to go into overtime for a few minutes. And after Sarah's intervention, we're going to take one or two questions. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Wyld. I do policy and privacy work with Tucows. I live in Toronto. I'm in the registrar stakeholder group, and I am the representative for the registrars on the RDRS Standing Committee. Really happy to be here, and I'm here to share a couple thoughts on the RDRS from the registrar's perspective. So as we already heard, RDRS is not the goal for the long-term platform. It is a pilot project intended to gather data about the volume of requests for the disclosure of previously public GTLD registration data, which will inform the board's decision about building a broader system. We registrars do believe that participating in the RDRS project is important, even as an intermediary step rather than as an end goal. And even though using it, it doesn't actually make it easier for registrars to handle requests. It just doesn't. But we support the process and we support the board's need for data on which to base their decision. And as we heard from Adam earlier, the number of registrars participating continues to increase, which also means that the portion of existing registered domains which can be requested through RDRS is growing. So while there is some benefit for registrars in that it standardizes request formats, we've also encountered some drawbacks. It ultimately means it doesn't really speed things up for us. One of those drawbacks was a design issue where the requester contact info was optional instead of mandatory, but this data is actually something that requesters require as part of our processing. So we've worked with the Standing Committee and with ICANN to have the system be modified so that data will be required, and we should see that change go live in a few weeks. Another thing that I can share is that we have found some patterns of information that is often missing from requests. It breaks down into 3 categories, so hopefully you will find this information helpful and practical. First, requests need to include a clear explanation of who the requester is and their connection to the domain name being requested. Second, requests need to include a description of why the requester needs the information or some indication of why the issue at hand would be assisted by having the domain owner's personal data. And finally, requesters should provide details on expected data processing, including how they will use the data, how they will protect the data, and when they will delete the data after they are completed their task. Now, this might all sound obvious, like, of course, if I'm making a request, I have to explain who I am and why I think that having the data will help the situation that I'm trying to work through. But it is often not provided. And in order for registrars to make a true balanced evaluation of the rights of the requester against the rights of the data subject, all of that information really is necessary. So with all that said, registrars continue to work with ICANN and with requesters to ensure that requests have everything that we need to process requests efficiently and without a lot of back and forth conversation. So hopefully this conversation is also helpful towards that. Ultimately, what requesters can expect from the RDRS is a clear path to create requests for previously public registration data, where they should get a response to each request, and that response will be clear and understandable, even though, as we heard, it's not necessarily disclosure all the time, every time. So this was quick, I know, and just a reminder before I hand back the mic to Thomas and we can have some questions and discussion. As both Thomas and Prudence mentioned, the Registrar Stakeholder Group is hosting a session at ICANN 80 where we will do a deep dive into real example RDRS requests, which we will anonymize, and we will look at what was included in the request and what the outcome was, and hopefully help people to understand why. Okay, so that was my whirlwind, and happy to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was great, and it was concise. So that's great given the time that we have left on this webinar. Lars, you should see whether or not we have questions.
Yes, of course, we've got questions, but we don't have much time left. So the first one is, but I think it already addresses that this is still work in progress, but the question is, I find that the space given for the grounds is quite limited. It is challenging to explain the trademark nature of infringement and the reasons for request. One time the registrar denied our request because apparently we did not specify the actual reason for request. Is our client wanting to contact the registrar to settle the issue amicably not enough for a reason?
Who wants to take that? Sarah, Odeline?
Yeah, thank you. This is Sarah.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh,
Yes.
Sorry. So a couple of thoughts there. If registrars generally have found that the amount of space provided is enough to explain the situation, the relation to the domain name, and how having the registration data would support resolving the situation. So many people do seem to figure it out. But if it's not enough space, there is also the opportunity to add attachments. So you can put it into a document, PDF it, and upload it with the request. If you want to talk to the registrar to get more information, their contact info should be available through a variety of means, including in the domains WHOIS and on the registrar's website, possibly also through RDRS, I've lost track. And if you disagree, it sounded like the end of the question was whether the request was valid or not. And that's not something that any of us can speak to because it is the registrar who registered or with which the domain is registered who makes that determination. Thank you.
Odeline, do you want to add to that?
Yes, just to add, we also increased slightly the number of characters just to compromise between, people who actually need a lot of words to explain and people who are more concise. The tip about adding the PDF is a very good one. It's always possible to add attachments. So if you need to have a lot of justification or argumentations, please add it in an attachment. So it's also easier, I believe, for registrars to process a request.
Thank you so much. And just to illustrate this, in the RDRS team's deliberations, we used the example that should be avoided of the cease and desist letters that maybe most of you, or if not all of you, have seen, where the first 20 pages are bragging about how great the trademark is. So leave out all the information that's just for illustration or for other purposes, and limit it to what's really needed for the disclosing side to make a legal assessment whether or not they can justify legitimate interest for you to process the request in your favor. Lars. And I should say we're going to take 2 or 3 more, so we're just going to do another 4 minutes. So I'm not going to do too much overtime.
So we've got 2 more. So the next one is also from Oski Centric from CSE Global. This is our request was denied because of the restrictions in local laws. This sounds like GDPR. Is it not the actual point of RDRS to avoid such restrictions?
So I think the point of RDRS is to create a system that is predictable and understandable and usable to submit requests in a manner that once you understand it, you know how to use it, you can do it again. There's a form. The point is not to guarantee disclosure, and it sounds like the controller for the data that you were requesting determined that you hadn't demonstrated a legal basis. So that is unfortunate, and it might be something to have a further conversation about, but it's not something that RDRS can circumvent. RDRS doesn't go around local law. Thank you.
Lars, do we have one more?
Yes, have the registrars been sharing among themselves their experience in order to improve both the processes and the consistency of their service to requesters?
Yes, the registrars have done a lot of work in this regard. So we have our regular stakeholder group meetings where we talk about the RDRS. We have an email chain where we have shared experiences. I have a Skype conversation with some registrars where we talk about it. There's a lot of different venues for registrars to collect our shared experience. And then that information is brought back by me to the standing committee and shared there. So within the standing committee, we have a tracking document where we've noted issues or our impressions of the RDRS. Those are categorized either as RDRS platform functionality or difficulties with the request itself as submitted by the requester. The platform functionality issues are some of well, they've all been prioritized, and some of those are in progress, as I think it was Odeline had mentioned. And so we're looking forward to seeing some improvements go live around the time of ICANN 80. But yes, we have been very diligently bringing our impressions back to the standing committee, and I hope that other stakeholder groups and supporting organizations will do the same.
And I guess on that uplifting note, it's a good opportunity for us to adjourn. Let me thank you for your patience, for staying longer than anticipated. Thank you for your participation, and most importantly, thanks to the speakers, thanks to Sarah, thanks to Prudence, thanks to Odeline, thanks to Adam, thanks to Lars, and to René, who's the technical wizard in the background, for making sure that everything works so smoothly. Watch out for the next webinars on this topic, and I hope that we can jointly make this a success. Have a great day. Bye-bye for today.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.